recognize the keynotes, and you may have your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, Keynotes is a presentation on behalf of the Georgetown section of the Regional Management Committee, Region 4, for the Alliance for Change. And Keynotes is expected to be a monthly series of public engagements on matters of national interest. And so this evening we have selected a theme, and we have our featured speaker. The theme of tonight's presentation is the collision of law and politics in the oil and gas era. So welcome once again. It's great to see all of you as the AFC celebrates its 14th year, its 14th anniversary. Let's put our hands together. And I think to have lasted 14 years, we must have done a few things well. So welcome once more. Officially, we are celebrating the 14th year on the 29th of October. That's the official date. But we have started celebrations from the 1st, and we go right up until the 29th. So happy anniversary, AFC. Let's put our hands together once more. And I want to welcome our brother, Nielsen McKenzie, who is going to introduce our featured speaker for this evening. Let's put our hands together for Nielsen.
Thank you, Jared. Good night, everyone. It's an exciting time in our country. It's an exciting time in our party. Good night, everyone. Good night. All right, I'm hearing somebody other than myself. I've been tasked with a very simple issue here, because all I have to say is written. And when last I checked, I could read a little bit. My task tonight is to introduce someone who is, in essence, a wonderful son of the soil. You know, often when we celebrate someone, we talk about them when they've passed away. But we want to celebrate our icons in their lifetime. And tonight, we want to talk a little bit about C.A. Nigel Hughes, etc., etc., etc. I'm reading here a little bit. I wouldn't go into all the details here, but suffice it to say that we begin with commercial law, its practice areas, first of all, and then I'll go around the other side. Commercial law, general and marine, insurance, intellectual property, telecommunications law, mergers and acquisitions, international business, commercial litigation, mining law, offshore investments, international law, criminal litigation, joint ventures, administrative law, energy law, public utilities, aviation, tax. Did I leave anything out? Nothing. Experience. Wow. 32 years. That's as long as I'm alive. 32 years experience as a practicing barrister at law, practicing attorney at law. And it says here that C.A. Nigel Hughes is a partner in the law firm Hughes, Fields and Stobie, and the chairman, HFS Corporate Services Incorporated. After graduating with honors in his first degree, that's LLB, and a master's in law, LLM, at University College London University in 1986. Mr. C.A. Nigel Hughes attended the Council of Legal Education in London in 1987, from which institution he graduated. He was then called to the bar in London as a member of the Inner Temple on the 24th day of November, 1997. Mr. Hughes was thereafter attached to the Commercial Chambers, Essex Court, Middle Temple, London, and subsequently Pump Court, London. In April 1998, he returned to Guyana, fortunately, where he joined the firm of Hughes, Fields and Stobie. After his arrival at the firm, Mr. Hughes was appointed head of the firm's IT department and was responsible for the considerable modernization of the firm. The firm is now an international law firm with a significant percentage of its work originating from the offshore jurisdiction. Ms. Hughes has been involved in several significant developments in the field of advocacy and legal practice in Guyana. He has developed considerable experience in the areas of banking, commercial law, insurance, intellectual property, telecommunications law, public utilities, mining, oil and gas, international finance, project finance, and mergers and acquisitions. Chambers and Partners, an independent international market research firm based in London, and publishers of Chambers Global, the world's leading lawyers, ranked Mr. Hughes as one of the top 5 lawyers in Guyana. After he was elected Vice President of Guyana Bar Association in 1999, Mr. Hughes initiated and managed the annual conference of the Guyana Bar Association, in which several international presenters attend. The forum is now the leading law conference in the country. In 2002, Mr. Hughes was elected to the President of Guyana Bar Association, and in that capacity was instrumental in convening the Social Partners Initiative, which comprised the Guyana Bar Association, the Private Sector Commission, and the Trade Union Congress. This initiative was established after the traditional means of engagement between the two major political parties had become significantly challenged, and the country embarked on a period of increased social degradation. Also in his capacity as President of Guyana Bar Association, Ms. Hughes established a special committee of the Guyana Bar Association to assist the Chief Justice in the reduction of backlog of cases. The committee successfully reviewed and advised the Honorable Chief Justice on the status of at least 2,000 cases, which side effects were subsequently brought up for consideration and disposed of by judges of the High Court and the Supreme Court. During the year 2003, Ms. Hughes was invited by the Chancellor of the Judiciary to sit on the Rules Committee, which was established to examine the proposed new rules of the High Court of the Supreme Court. In 2003, Mr. Hughes was invited to sit, and did sit, upon a criminal law review committee headed by legal luminary, Senior Counsel Rex McKay. The committee was tasked with the responsibility of reviewing the criminal law and procedures in Guyana. The committee concluded its deliberations in 2004 and submitted its report to the Honorable Chancellor. Ms. Hughes was retained by the Inter-American Development Bank as a consultant on civil society in 2005. In this capacity, he developed the Civil Society Action Plan for the bank's Civil Society Advisory Board. Mr. Hughes has attended the IADB meeting in civil society participation in government in Peru. 2005, Mr. Hughes was legal advisor to the successful bidder in one of the Caribbean's largest mergers and acquisitions, the takeover and acquisition of Courts UK Limited in the Caribbean. 2006 and 2007, Mr. Hughes was appointed a lecturer at the University of the West Indies, Executive Masters in Business Administration program. He has lectured in Belize, Tortola, and Guyana as part of the postgraduate program. Mr. Hughes is a member of the International Bar Association, International Trademark Association, State Capital Global Law Firm Group, and the World Services Group. He's a member of the Board of Governors of St. Stanislaus College, his alma mater, in Georgetown, Guyana, and the Board of Directors of Habitat for Humanity, Guyana Incorporated. Organizations, memberships, and affiliations: Criminal Law Review Committee, Rules Committee, Presidency of the Guyana Bar Association, Inter-American Development Bank, University of West Indies Executive Masters in Business Administration Program, International Bar Association, International Trademark Association, State Capital Global Law Forum Group, World Services Group, Board of Directors of Habitat for Humanity, Guyana. Wow, wow, wow. I think I've said it all. Now I can stop. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a distinct honor and privilege to welcome, after all this talk here, the Honorable Son of the Soil, wonderful person to have met and known. And it's because he went to the same school I went to. All right, don't bother with that one. Mr. Clarence Nigel Hughes. Ladies and gentlemen, let's stand as we welcome him to the podium.
Vice President Kimraj Ramchan and leader of the Alliance for Change, Chairman of the Alliance for Change, Mr. Rafael Trotman, Vice Chairman of the Alliance for Change, Kathy Nigel Hughes, my old friends. I really am honored to have my good friends from West Coast of the East travel all the way here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, friends all, thank you for coming. It really is a very special pleasure for me to have been invited to give the inaugural lecture in this series, and I do want to commend whoever had the idea to have this series, because it's particularly critical for Guyana now that we have discussions about major issues that will affect the country away from the political noise. And so I want to applaud whoever had this idea, and I wish to encourage you continuing. I want to commence this evening's presentation on the collision of law and politics in Guyana's oil and gas era by setting out some of the assumptions that I have made and also the context. The views expressed by me tonight are entirely mine and don't even represent anybody else in my household, so let me make that very clear. Permit me to start with a quotation. Sorry, Minister Rajkumar, please forgive me for not having acknowledged you. And the quotation goes this way: "The petroleum industry is the world's largest business. Since its discovery, no other commodity, neither historically or presently, rivals the petroleum industry's importance to the world's political and economic order. Even with the rise of environmental preservation movements, petroleum remains the motivating force of the industrial society and the lifeblood of civilization it helped create." That's a quotation from Daniel Yergin, and it's from his book called The Epic Quest for Oil, Money, and Power. I suppose that's where we are at the moment in Guyana. I've relied on the accuracy of that statement in my presentation. The second assumption I've made is this: the discovery of oil in Guyana is a world-class find. It's not just a large find, it's a world-class find, which has elevated the resource, not the country, to global significance. And I think we need to bear that in mind. The resource that we have found is globally significant. It doesn't necessarily mean that Guyana has become globally significant, not as yet. Assumption number 3. The global experience of the conduct of business of oil and gas has rarely, except in the cases of revolution and great social upheaval, been affected by the domestic politics of the countries where the oil has been located. And I think we need to bear that in mind. Assumption number 4, even in the event of wars and violent revolutions in the host country, the sale of oil and gas continues unaffected by that domestic turmoil. Bear that in mind. In the worst days of the Iraq War, oil, even if it might have been the reason for the war, continued to be so. So we need to bear that in mind so we don't necessarily have a disproportionate or inflated sense of importance as a result of the find. What is our current relationship between law and politics in this dear land of ours? Our supreme law, the Constitution, purports to set out, amongst other things, our national ambitions and our national ethos. Article 1, Part 1, the first declaration in the Constitution of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana states as follows: Guyana is an individual, secular, democratic, sovereign nation in the course of transition from capitalism to socialism, and shall be known as the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Into this republic of ours, which is in transition to socialism, lands the most important commodity in the world, that is the world of market-driven economies in the world. In this transition, we are either on pause, we permanently abandon the socialism, or we're marching gainfully on towards it. Article 13 of our Constitution then goes on to say, the principal objectives of the political system of the state is to establish an inclusionary democracy by providing increasing opportunities for the participation of the citizens and their organizations in the management and decision-making processes of the state, with particular emphasis on those areas of decision-making that directly affect their well-being. Very long. And Article 15 says the goal of the economic development includes the objective of laying the material basis for the greatest possible satisfaction of the people's growing material, cultural, intellectual requirements, as well as dynamically stable development of their personality, creativity, entrepreneurial skills, and cooperative relations in a plural society. And this is very interesting. The state shall intervene to mitigate any deleterious effects of competition on individuals or groups. And we finally locate the court in Article 39, which says, it is the duty of Parliament, the courts, and of all other public agencies to be guided in the discharge of their functions by the principles set out in this chapter, which included the truth that I just referred to. And Parliament may provide for those principles to be enforceable in any court or tribunal. End of quote. So we have now declared ourselves, and to the world at large, we are a nation in transition to socialism, and the courts must be guided by these principles. Very interesting, because the way in which the current debate is going on, I think the last word we ever hear is socialism. It is perhaps a little facetious of me to contend that we are still transitioning to socialism. But if our supreme law says so, then it may be so, even if only aspirationally. And perhaps we need to examine that, because I don't believe the state is still transitioning to anything other than the most basic form of capitalist exploitation, at least if you listen to our political leaders. Articles 13 and 15, of course, are not justiciable, and what I mean by that is that you can't take the state to court if it breaches it. There are a couple of things that we have to admit to ourselves if we're going to have a candid discussion about the future of the country. We live in a deeply divided society, and that is probably axiomatic, and so too is our politics. Mao Zedong, at least 3 decades ago, said, politics is war without blood, and war is politics with blood. Just as the Rastas would say, I take on that for a minute. Politics is war without blood, and war is politics with blood. In Guyana, we have possibly exhibited both sides of that coin. The advent of oil and the promise of great riches has highlighted how high the stakes are to achieve political power. The year 2019 has seen absolutely no progress in our legislative or regulatory preparation for the most important contributor to our GDP for the next 10 years. Absolutely zero development, no legislative or regulatory preparation. Every single opportunity we have had collectively as a nation to draft a bill for the management and good governance of the oil and gas industry, and which bill could have been presented by either side of the House and agreed despite their political differences, every single opportunity has been missed. We have subverted the preparation of our future at the altar of political wars. We are more concerned about ensuring how we share the corn rather than ensuring how we can grow more corn to share around on the next occasion. Our recent experiences with the interpretation of the CCJ's decision on the effect of the no confidence vote brought into clear focus the distinction between the impact politics has on the interpretation of the court's order. Depending on where you sit in the political spectrum, the court's decision either meant election by a particular date, or, if you're on the other side, after the announcement of the readiness of GCOM for elections. This dispute was among those of all of whom are well versed in the law. Our politics determined our interpretation of the law as pronounced by our highest court. But it didn't stop there. Some of us then proceeded to attack the highest court, declaring that it was, quote, timid and ineffectual. One very senior legal practitioner declared, and I quote, but its reliance on the integrity of third world politicians to do what is right is deeply short-sighted and mistaken in the absence of coercive remedies. The decision's failure to bring forth elections will leave a permanent scar on Guyana's polity. That's an extremely senior legal practitioner saying, first of all, we were third world politicians and it was a mistake of our highest court to rely on the goodwill, I assume, not to impose a coercive order. This was a clear, unambiguous invitation for the court to enter in and perhaps trespass upon the political arena, thereby exposing it to further allegations of politicization. And unfortunately, because of our division, not a single person got up to say we should respect the decision of the CCJ rather than attack the institution because we were unhappy with the decision. This is perhaps the strongest indicator to the citizenry of what we should expect after 2020, March 2nd. We are now at the advent in the unfolding oil and gas era in which the interpretation of orders of court on matters of political importance are likely to be subject to different interpretations dependent on the political consequences of those decisions. We will be treading on new and perhaps dangerous ground where our interpretation of the law is governed by our politics, which, with all our jurists following suit. Let us for a second put aside the domestic consequences of such an approach in the era of oil and gas and briefly look at what messages we are collectively sending to investors and potential investors in Guyana. In a world where the conduct of the business of oil and gas is transacted, the unpredictability of what the interpretation of an order of court says, and which is subject to your political position, questions the reliability of your legal system. When we add to this the accusation of timidity and ineffectualness to our courts, the investor in the industry will continue to design contracts which will avoid the possibility of our disputes being settled in our courts or by arbitration in Guyana, and will insist on clauses being included in those contracts which will avoid any form of domestic interpretation. Guyana is a signatory to the Convention on the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes. This treaty insulates decisions made by international arbitrators in investment disputes between the state and the investor from the impact of domestic laws. Translated, if you go to arbitration and the ICBIS, any decision they make transcends whatever your local laws may say on that investment. And we don't appreciate the impact of that. So you can pass whatever laws you want. If you go to international arbitration and a determination is made on the consequences of your domestic legislation, the decision of the arbitrators overrides it. And once we conduct ourselves the way we have been conducting ourselves in the interpretation of our laws, we will continue to provide reasons why people will not want to rely on our domestic courts. Competing arbitrations of court decisions which are driven by politics increases the cost of political insurance with the attendant consequences for business other than oil and gas. The reason I say other than oil and gas is oil and gas is the one commodity that you can actually have a raging war going on and it will continue to be sold. This is unlike rice. This is unlike any agricultural product which is affected by domestic politics. If you have a problem with your port, if there's a strike, those products don't get exported. Oil and gas is such a major industry, irrespective of what we do, bar a revolution like they had in 1979 in Iran, oil and gas will continue to be sold. Investment decisions in the oil and gas industry are long-term by nature, given the significant capital investment required by the industry. Long-term investment decisions require a certain degree of predictability, certainty of legal systems, and reliability in the economic assumptions driving the contract. This has to be one of the principal drivers behind the demand for contract stability clauses. I believe that one of our national collective objectives, irrespective of which side of the fence we sit on, is to make Guyana an attractive investment destination, not only for oil and gas, but for several other industries. How do we achieve this, given our historic mistrust and antagonisms, which have and continue to threaten to paralyze our development? Perhaps we should commence with an admission that our current mistrust, distrust, and war without bloodshed should and is likely to dissipate the holding of, is not likely to dissipate despite the holding of national elections under the current electoral system. So in other words, whatever happens to come 2020, we will continue the mistrust, we will continue the distrust, and the war without blood will continue. Unpleasant and embarrassing as it is, we have to admit that we are nowhere near national unity, and the promise of real national unity seems to be a trifle fleeting at the present time. In the absence of national unity and consensus, the question is, what best protects all of our collective interests and reduces our insecurities? The answer to that is governance and leadership. I don't intend to address the issue of governance because my views of what constitutes good leadership, address the issue of leadership because my views of what constitutes good leadership may not necessarily be yours. The jury is still out on whether the constitutional changes which were effected in our last round of constitutional amendments in 1999-2000 have had the desired effect insofar as governance is concerned. There were two principal issues which were prevalent at the time: power sharing and good governance. The appetite for power sharing seems to have diminished somewhat, whether that's because the prospect of unchecked executive power or the levels of our mutual distrust. Irrespective of the outcome of the next election, a substantial part of our population will feel both insecure and isolated. Our racial insecurities have very high ignition points and low combustion levels to be allayed by accepted results of a fair election. With the advent of new political prospects and new horizons, it is perhaps time to consider the creation of an entirely new constitution with the appropriate framework which will reflect our new vision, our modern aspirations, as well as a transition to new and different horizons of governance. Second to none on the planet, less concentration of power in the hands of the head of the executive, and a very robust institutional body technically equipped to make decisions in the best interest of the entire population. I am keenly aware that constitutional change does not win elections. It is the pocket and personal security which will take the day. Perhaps the question we should all ask ourselves is, even if the party we support, wins the next election, how are we going to restrain the new mandarins of economic prosperity with rapidly and ever increasing visible signs of unexplained wealth from abusing their power and their wealth to our detriment? Where and to whom are we going to run when your own has run amok with unchecked political power and newfound wealth? Where are we going to go when the interpretations of orders of court depends on the interpretation of the rich and powerful, and the enforcement of those orders against the rich and powerful is only a fleeting illusion? Wealth can sometimes have psychotropic effects, which often obscure the suffering of those unconnected to us. Our protection cannot lie in the exhortations of our leadership to be committed to good governance. We must collectively commit to ensuring that our judiciary at every level is insulated from the machinations of our politicians. That perhaps is easier said than done. But when we seek to diminish the standing of the only institution that protects us from the power of the state, we are, in the words of the national poet Martin Carter, consumed. Leadership and governance is what is so desperately needed to transform this dear republic of ours. And in the absence of the former, may we all collectively commit to ensuring that even our own in power are subject to the best governance practices. Better must come. Thank you.
Let's put our hands together once more. Attorney Nigel Hughes. We're going to bring a Q&A session and ask Paul to come. and take the podium away for us. I'm going to grab another microphone, and we're going to get some questions or comments from members of the audience. All right, so I think we're good to go. I have a hand here, Paul. I have a hand in the side. Short comments, statements, questions.
Thank you. I'll do a little of all three. Short comment, question, statement. So my name is Juliet Addington. I'm an overseas space Guyanese. I have a passion for my country. I listened to what Mr. Hughes said. So this is the scenario. Governance and leadership. The diaspora is a force to contend with, and it has been severely neglected. We're the voice for you to the international community overseas. What is being done? The other aspect is civil society. Guyana civil society has to get up and get out into it. It has to be done through leadership. What are you doing about civil society? That's a force that in the international community will respect if empowered correctly. And also, the diaspora has that, has the mechanisms, has the expertise. What is being done in Guyana to educate the ordinary Guyanese on the importance of the diaspora, the power of the diaspora. Mr. Hughes, I want you to seriously address that so I can take the message back to the Guyanese and the Caribbean community when I return to the U.S. early next week. Thank you.
I appreciate the question. What I will say is, I am not sure I'm the person who's equipped to respond to that. I think you have Kemraj and Raffle here. But I certainly know that in terms of the diaspora, the AFC was the first party, I think since 2006 when they were launched, to commit to diaspora participation in the National Assembly. Of course, the difficulty with that is the mechanics of how it operates. I am sure that the technology exists now where you can actually have active participation once the appropriate IT arrangements are made. There are going to be logistical challenges in relation to how you actually vote for a member of the National Assembly in the diaspora. But I certainly think that the diaspora has a key role. Personally, I am disappointed that more was not done to actively ensure or effect their meaningful participation. One of the realities of the oil and gas industry, I'm sure Minister Troutman will bear me out, is that because we have no history in oil and gas, clearly we don't have the talent here. So a lot of the people who are in the industry now, we have to send out, and it's going to take them 3 to 4 to 5 years to get trained, come back with their degrees. So the diaspora has some talent that is related to oil and gas. The question is, how do we get the best of their participation in it? One doesn't have to travel to Guyana anymore to participate. The technology allows us to participate wherever we are in the world. And I believe that efforts should be made to actively capture that so that it's not just a forum for the exchange of ideas, but there's actually a route map to how you consider those ideas, assess them, have them challenged against the existing data that we have, and then look towards implementation. One of the things I think that I don't want to say lack, but one of the things we so desperately need in Guyana is a long-term vision committed by both sides for the country, and then we can argue the implementation, we can go to elections and implementation. But in the absence of that, the problem is we will continue to see interrupted and staggered development where it happens. And because our institutions are not particularly strong, our financial management is not the best. We were managing budgets that were relatively small. With the influx of this large volume of revenue that we're going to get, and of course all the technical data that will come from the oil companies that have to be checked to verify, I think it's only a matter of time before we rapidly see how desperately skilled and on the people we are. But I'm not the person to really address the question of the plans. You have these good people here to deal with that.
spoke about a divided society, about this notion of war without blood, distrust, mistrust. How do we navigate with our newfound wealth? What might we have done better to date that we haven't done? How do we navigate?
Well, I think the first thing we have to, it's a bit like Alcoholics Anonymous. You have to put your hands up in the air and say, I'm a Guyanese and I'm racially biased. If you don't start from that premise, or I'm likely to be racially biased, if you don't start from that premise that we all are kumbaya, I love you, it's great, we go play cricket, we think this is the end of everything and it's fantastic, and the next day we go to war. If you don't start with an admission that we have racial cleavages in our society, then we have a problem. So, like an alcoholic, we have to admit that we have a society that has been deeply divided. Not today, it's been deeply divided. Let me go all the way back, 1838. What happened is when the British brought Indian replacement labor to replace the African enslaved on the estate, it took away the power of the enslaved African to be able to bargain for wages. And so that natural hostility between the Indian population and the African population started that far back. So this didn't start with the departure of Mr. Burnham from the BBB in 1953 or 1955 or where it is. I think the ingredients for that existed since then. When you add to that the fact that the African population, when they bought their estates, they were sabotaged by the state, and then they didn't get, as the Americans say, they 40 acres and a mule. They were economically disadvantaged. So when they look at what replaced them, the people who replaced them, it wasn't their decision to come. When they look at what replaced them and that those persons were being paid for their labor, they started off at a disadvantage. They then had to deal with sabotage from the state. And so all those hostilities can be used as a basis for separation. We have to have a candid discussion about that. It's not something that you can wish away. Reparations is just part of the larger discussion on that. And therefore, as we come forward, and of course politics is really the control of state power so that you can use it for the benefit of the citizens. Of course, citizens, it starts with your supporters first. We have to start having a real candid discussion on that. Now, the biggest challenge to that is that the political leadership of the two principal ethnic groups in Guyana do not acknowledge that they lead ethnic parties. Both of them say they're national parties. So if you start off by saying, I'm leading a national party, everybody's part of it, then of course you don't prevent everybody from coming into it. You can't start to have a discussion about racism if you're saying I'm a national party and I'm not racist. So it's not that you have to admit that you are racially biased, but you have to admit that we have this in our community and it needs to be addressed. And after we start that conversation, and we can't only have that conversation in Georgetown, we can't only have that conversation on the coast, we have to have that conversation everywhere else. Because quite often what we forget is the indigenous people are the most economically disadvantaged, the most prejudiced against, and we don't even hear their voice because of their remoteness from the center of Guyana, which is on the coast. So we have a lot of work to do, and we have to start that discussion. And that's perhaps the reason why I said this starts with leadership. This starts with having leaders who say, yes, we have this problem. Yes, I recognize this problem. Let us discuss it. Let us get the data. Now, let's just have an emotional session where you say, well, the neighbor slapped my child 10 years ago. Let us be driven by credible, reliable data so that we can begin to identify a pathway forward so we can get out of this. It's not an easy process, and it's not an immediate process.
Greetings, Brother Nigel Hughes. I'm happy that you touched on the issue of constitutional reform, and more particularly, just to logically the question that was just posed. Do you think that a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, similar to what South Africa would have had, will help us with the divisiveness and the racism that we face? That is just the question that was asked. But my question really have to do with the fact that Do you think that the solution to our constitutional debacle lies in a new constitution, or the attitude of those leaders or the players or the actors to uphold the Constitution? And I ask this question because I remember vividly the Honorable Justice Saunders making the point that while GCOM should always be prepared, and this is in the case of the chairman that was appointed, whereby the CCJ found that it wasn't appointed. The president erred in the appointment, hence the reason why we have a new chairperson. And the fact that GCOM's readiness for election appears to be one that they find very strange, simply because if you have an article in your constitution that provides for a confidence motion or abnormality, Justice Saunders was contending that GCOM should always be prepared. So is the solution really a new constitution? If we don't change the attitude, can we really pour new wine into old wineskins? I thank you.
Thank you for that. Let me start off by saying the answer to that, I'm not taking the easy way out, is both for this reason. The Constitution is supposed to capture your national aspiration, your national ethos. We have a Constitution now in Article 1 that says, as I indicated, we are in transition to socialism. The fact is, we know we're not there. We're absolutely nowhere near there. So, if in the first article of our Constitution, there's a false premise that does not accurately reflect where we are as a country, then we need to change it. The reason that I have proposed a new constitution rather than tinkering with the existing one is because the premise of the existing one, as set out in Article 1, is no longer relevant. We are going into a new era globally, not just Guyana, the entire world. We are going into an era of mass information. We're going into an era of IT. We're going into an era of green, of ecological responsibility. So a lot of the things that would have driven our Constitution, first of all in 1966, then in 1970, where the world was bipolar, ideology was a big part, constitutions would have reflected the era. Our Constitution now needs to reflect where we are. And the good thing about where we are is we are now about to start on an entirely new economic basis for the future. No longer is it what the British left with us. No longer is it sugar. No longer is it going to be rice and bauxite. It is now a new era in which the revenues from oil, it is our responsibility to be able to spend those in areas which will sustain the economic development of the country. So if I were to say to you, imagine a high-speed train between Georgetown and Manaus, which is bringing at the same time not just passengers, but is the lifeblood for the economic development for northern Brazil. And then you get your goods to port in Georgetown or in the coast in less than 18 hours, and you're at the Panama Canal with the entire Asian continent on the other side with 3 days sailing. That is where our vision should be, and the Constitution should contemplate what we aspire to in the future. We're not heading to socialism. The world doesn't have that division. Nobody's talking about ideology now as a basis. It's a different era. So, my friend says except for his sons. So my plea for a new constitution is that we have an opportunity for a new beginning. Not of all making, but we have that privilege, and therefore let us set parameters that are realistic in our aspirations and contemplate where we're going to take the country forward. So and once we set those, the culture gets set. So the Constitution reflects the ethos, and I hope God blesses us with leaders, successive leaders, not just now, but in the future, that embrace that ethos, that new aspiration, that new constitution, and take the country forward. Ghana is not going to look this way in 5 years. However we twist it and turn it, the economic opportunities here are going to be so multitudinous that people from Brazil, the entire Caribbean, and everywhere else is going to be here. So this audience, if you had this meeting in 2025, is not going to look like this. The standard of living is going to be completely different. So let us deal with what is coming, and we can not get caught in the aspects that are in our present constitution and spend an awful lot of national time about who did who, what, when, where, and what is wrong. Not saying that you don't examine them, but you need to be aspirational. In relation to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the question with that is, for it to be successful, we need political commitment on all sides. There's no point in having a Truth and Reconciliation Commission if the leadership of one part of the population feels it's a witch hunt. So you're not going to get anywhere if one hand is clapping on a national committee for national reconciliation. It has to be a project that we all commit to, which will require the leadership of all the major parties, not just the three, but all the major parties and all the civil society groups, all the civic groups, all the communities, LGBTG, all those communities, to commit to the Truth and Reconciliation, not just in principle, but the consequences of what we're going to do with the information that comes from it. Because there's no point in having a Truth and Reconciliation to hear that John Smith shoot 3 people and he didn't get charged. It is what led and created the circumstances of impunity that allowed John Smith to be able to commit those acts and to make sure that we put in place the laws that prevent that and make sure that a political leader cannot avoid the consequences of that in the future.
Another question coming from the floor.
Mr. Hughes, I commend you for all the information that you shared with us tonight in the gas, power and money, transition, the law. You have articulated the law in a very, very effective way. And I commend you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
And you're not. I'm sitting next to a young attorney, and I don't know if it's touching on, but the fact of the matter is that you mentioned seeking an opportunity to transition. I will say this, John Smith, that you mentioned, is my friend and he's a minister of the gospel. Please take his name out of that shooting thing. Now, the real deal is this. People, the real deal is this. We have missed opportunities. I'm in my mid-70s. I was there when we received independence. I was there when I was born, 1946. My mother was Indian, pure Indian. My grandfather came from India. And my father was black. My mother was cast out of the village because she had a black child sucking a clear, beautiful puppy.
Memory glad. Memory glad.
I'll tell you what. The real deal is this. We've articulated domestic law, this law and all the rest of the law. But we've missed out on the laws of God. My beloved brother, you mentioned God in your deliberations. You mentioned God. You wish that God would change things. Today, I had the blessed privilege of reading an editorial in this Daily Chronicle. It spoke of honest politicians. How can we transition into honesty? The laws of God are 10. I'll be short because I'm a short man. There are 10 laws, Exodus. The first 4 is vertical. It speaks of your relationship with God. The next law, the last 6 in that 10 commandments, speaks about what horizontal relationship with human beings, with our neighbors. The last of those laws is, covet not your neighbor property, which is the idol. How are we going to get politicians to cease from coveting the riches and the wealth of this nation? We all have to embrace the laws of God. That's all I have.
What I would say to you, first of all, sir, is Happy Diwali. And I only say that to emphasize the fact that God quite often depends on where you sit. I'm not saying that what you have said is inaccurate or not correct, but we've had too many wars in the history of mankind because of our religious differences. So perhaps that's why the drafters of the Constitution said that Guyana is a secular state. So we're all entitled to our own religious beliefs. But I think the principles of what you have referred to set out in those commandments apply irrespective of whether you're a Christian or not. Having said that, the reality is, and Mao Zedong said it, politics is war without guns. If you are a politician, you are in a political war for power. What you intend to do with the power could be good, could be bad, depends on where you sit, because you plan to transform societies if you get that power. That's part of the reason you're in the battle. Politicians are no different from me and you. They're subject to the same human temptations. They have the same human feelings. And I think if anything we have learned from power, irrespective of which part of the globe you come from, is that when you get power, or at least from the population's perspective of the politician, when they acquire that power, something seems to go on chemically in the brain that causes them, from our perspective, to be less connected, less dedicated, and more self-interested from where we sit. But I will say this for their benefit. We don't sit in their position. And we don't understand the myriad of considerations that they have to take into account before they arrive at a decision that we may think is particularly biased against us. So I don't think we should pray for honest politicians. I want to do it the other way around. And I'm just using my experience as a defense lawyer. Every client that comes to me says they're innocent. I am not interested in whether or not they're innocent. They haven't come to hire me to prove their innocence. They've come to hire me to get them out of a particular dilemma, and that's what I do. Whether you're interested or not is your question with God. So with politicians, rather than continue to hope that we get honest politicians, let's flip the assumption. Let us assume that all politicians are likely to come off the straight and narrow, so that we are pleasantly surprised when they stay on the straight and narrow. But since we presume, it's a bit like the American visa, they assume that you are going to be an immigrant, and it's only when you prove you're not an immigrant you get the visa. So let us assume that all the potential politicians are going to be deviated for whatever reason. We don't have to go into the reasons. And therefore, let's put in place the institutional framework that will either prevent them from going offline or punish them the second they go offline. And like everybody else, once you get burnt by the kettle, you're not putting your hands back. It is the lack of accountability and consequences for the political class that quite often leads to what we call dishonest or politicians who are not true. So that's why my plea is, let us get a governance system in place so that we don't have to really sweat who is in place, because we must know that the second they start to go off the narrow path, there are consequences.
We have another question coming.
Hi Joe, I'm John Blair. I'm too modest to stand up. I'm the editor of this best-selling book. Can you hear me?
Very, very
We're
good.
not hearing you.
Oil Dorado. Thank you very much, Ken Raj.
Thank you for some more volume upstairs.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, I'm John Blair. I'm the editor of this best-selling book, which is sold 100 copies in 2 weeks in Ghana, and you can only get them now on Amazon. So I know a little bit about it. And I spent the last 2 weeks talking to people one-on-one for an hour each morning. Quite a lot. Still here? Yeah? Right, is that better?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So I spent the last 2 weeks talking to people across the range about oil. So I know a little bit about it. And what actually shocks me is what they call legislative anomie. There is no. The oil companies think that this is nirvana for them. This is the Wild West. They make up their regulation. Tullow virtually said to me, we are self-regulated. And because of the political situation, because of your weakness, there is no legislation. So what you have is oil companies driving coaches and horses and just going ahead and no law. When is Ghana going to catch up? When is the law going to catch up with the oil companies?
Well, I did admit that collectively as a country this year, we have lost the entire year from even doing the most basic, i.e. establishing the Petroleum Commission. We've lost that because of politics. I think whether you're an opposition leader or whether you are the leader of the government, the reality is, with oil coming, you need a Petroleum Commission, you need the regulations, you need to people the Petroleum Commission with people who are appropriately qualified. That doesn't matter whether it's AP and UAFC or whether it's PPP, whether it's ANUG or whoever. But unfortunately, our approach, our cultural approach, which is perhaps a cultural weakness, is that we are more interested in the fight than actually preparing for what is actually going to look after us for the next 20 years. So it's a weakness, and all of us, the citizenry who are not politically active, look at this fight going on, and like any boxing match, we go, yeah, you get hit, you get hit. And while that is happening, exactly what you say takes place. No legal framework, no regulatory framework. The oil companies continue, and that's why in my presentation I concentrated on saying that irrespective of what happens domestically, oil companies make money. They will always make money. It is our loss if we don't get our act together.
So they must be laughing all the way to the back.
Sorry?
They must be laughing all the way to the back.
Well, I think they were laughing all the way to the back from the time of the discovery. So, and then it's up to us. It's for us. It's for us to be able to deal with it. The other comment that I make on that is that we are a very unforgiving people. We are not going to get everything right at the start. It's impossible. We can't go into a new industry.
To get nothing right from the start is pretty good achievement.
Of course, and if we get nothing right from the start, then we at least should admit that we have gotten nothing right, and therefore how do we avoid getting nothing the second time around?
Thank you for the question. Do you have another question? I'm going to say moderator's privilege for the final question. I didn't this. Oh, I see Alan. Alan, thanks.
Good night. Mr. Hughes, you made a very profound statement during your presentation when you said, regardless of what happens after the coming elections, a large portion of the Guyanese population will feel afraid and isolated. You assess that this didn't begin, and this political divide and this ethnic conflict that has held us back so long didn't begin with the splitting of the PPP. But in fact, it began much longer. I think you say since 1838. Every single time in our nation's history that we have come upon major economic changes, it has been met by major demographic changes. The birth of the sugar industry brought about a massive influx of slave labor to work on those plantations. The end of slavery brought large amounts of indentured laborers to replace the slaves. The birth of independence saw the loss of the vast majority of our European citizens, that Guyanese European. And now today, I was looking at the demographic changes in the most oil-rich countries, Kuwait, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, all of which has seen their population double over the last decade and a half. So my question to you is this: do you see another round of dramatic demographic changes in Guyana because of this oil discovery? And how will that impact the racial divide and conflict that we've had over all these years?
Oh, certainly. Before I answer that, I just wanted you mentioned something on leadership. When Nelson Mandela was president of South Africa, and of course South Africa was, not only was it divided along racial lines between black and whites, within the black community there were huge differences because you had the Inkatha freedom fighters, you had Chief Buthelezi, and Buthelezi and Mandela did not get on. Every time Mandela, not every time, but quite often when Mandela left South Africa on state visits, he would leave Chief Buthelezi, his chief rival, to act as president. Now, That's an act of leadership. Symbolic, but important. It meant that he trusted him enough with the reins of power while he wasn't there. Now, we could argue that, well, he really couldn't do very much, but symbolically, it was important. To come to your question, without a doubt, there's going to be significant demographic change. If you just look at Georgetown now, Georgetown before used to be quite dark in terms of the population. Georgetown now is changing. You go to the restaurants, just you go to Movie Town. Movie Town is jam-packed every single night of every day of every week with a broad cross-section, not only of Guyanese, of international people. We don't have the skills in oil and gas yet because we don't have the history, so we're not going to have. So those skills have to come in. What happens when populations, when visitors come to our country? They meet locals, they get married, they have children, so you start to change the demographics. Brazil, our neighbor, used to have a policy where they would put an army camp on their side of the border next to an indigenous community on the other side in another country. Human nature being what it is, they'd start to get children, Portuguese would become, or Brazilian would become the dominant language, and then all of a sudden the border became a little less defined and a lot more hazy. Without a doubt, there's going to be a significant demographic change to Guyana. Phase 2 of the oil and gas development expects 4 FPSOs between now and 2025. That is unprecedented in the globe. It has excited the world. It's only Guyanese that have not fully appreciated the significance of this. The people have to run that. The support of 4 FPSOs, the amount of boats have people that have to be on them. Just the support for the industry, the pipes, the repairs, all of that is going to require skilled labor. While we are getting up to speed to be able to provide it as Guyanese, we're going to have to get trained by people who are not Guyanese. And so there will be a significant demographic change that we can avoid. That's what's coming. So what will happen, if you look at what's happening in Guyana, the Indian population has dropped from 52 all the way down to maybe 40 or 39. The African population has dropped. And which population is growing? The mixed. The mixed population is definitely, in the next 10 years, going to dominate Guyana. So even amongst ourselves, we're going to go through those changes. So the demographics, we are changing our own demographics. And I think with foreign labor and foreign experts coming in, and just the presence of foreign people, it will change. And that's before you go to the gold industry, which of course is dominated by the Brazilians, and before you go to, by the time you put in either a road link, or if we get to the stage where we put in a rail link to northern Brazil, Manaus, it's going to happen. So, without a doubt, thanks for that easy question.
All right. I see Delhi and gentleman here in the black shirt, and then I'll ask a final question. Sorry, I see a couple hands in front here protesting the final question. Great.
Good evening, Mr. Hughes, and good evening, everyone. My question is a three-part question. Is politics and education...
Can you put the mic closer to you? I can't hear.
Okay. My question will be a three-part question. Is politics and education, politics and leadership, and education and oil wealth? So I heard you mention that first, to get rid of the racial divide in the country, we must accept that it exists. But what I've noticed at the University of Guyana, because I'm a student, is they constantly teach you the same thing over and over, which is a syllabus that exists in the Western world. And that is what we have to use to go forward in life, same as the Constitution. So arguing forward, you have to use what the Constitution gives you and interpret that. So in politics, it teaches according to Machiavelli, to be a great politician, that you love and fear, and if you can't achieve both, it's best you achieve fear. So what I'm asking you, do you believe that our syllabus should change also, to change our future leaders in Ghana? The second question is, do you agree with the sharing of oil wealth or Al Capital to the mass Guyanese public? And what are your opinions on this and how we can move forward? And my last question, actually, sorry. In Singapore, they have a law for the general public that says maybe after every, I don't know the specific year, but I'm going to say maybe a 2-year period, anyone working in the public sector must go back to school and up their level of knowledge, the current syllabus that they have, in order to provide efficient service. How do you think that will suit with our current culture now?
Thanks. I hope my memory doesn't fail me here. In relation to education and the syllabus, of course, I think syllabi change and the passage of time, you have to change, otherwise you're going to be teaching the same stuff. What I would say to anybody who's in a university or any tertiary level or any education institution is not so much the content, but the methodology of analysis that you take away from that education institution. So if you're smart enough to figure out that what they're teaching you is either dated, not current, then you're smart enough to be able to go and find what is the appropriate contemporary solution or analysis and solution to move forward. So it's not an excuse to say, oh, UG is training me stuff with the syllabus is 10 years old. Sure, you should protest. Sure, you should bring that to the attention of the academic board. But if you're smart enough to appreciate what is happening, it's the analytical tools that you get from the educational process. So quite often I say to people who become lawyers, don't assume that you have to practice law. It's the discipline the teaching of law brings to you. In relation to the Singapore question, with the civil service, continuing education is necessary whether you're in the private or public sector. Unfortunately, because we come from a culture where if you got into the civil service, it was a job for life without actually having to upgrade your skills or where your promotion did not necessarily relate to your efficiency in your post, but was a result of time, it created a different set of incentives. To be a successful country, you have to continue to be educated. When Raphael and I came out, they didn't have internet. I think Bill Clinton was 1996, I came out in 88, they didn't have internet. Look what has happened between Samsung S6 and where we are now, in the period of whatever, 2 years. And the technology is going to change even more rapidly going forward. So the only way you can deal with that is not the retention of information that you get in university, but how you can analyze and move forward so that you can be ahead of the curve. I can't remember the first question, but I think I did answer it somewhere in there. Transfer. Oh, transfer of wealth. Well, the question is not so much a transfer of wealth. Every single politician, far right to far left, will tell you that they're transferring the wealth to the people. We all use the mantra of the people. The question is, what system do you put in place to meaningfully transfer the creation of wealth? You just don't want to transfer wealth because that doesn't really help you at the end of the day, unless, of course, the people to whom you're transferring the wealth have the academic qualifications, not necessarily academic, have the ability to understand how to invest that wealth so it grows. And so we have to have a discussion about whether we're going to have cash handouts or whether they're going to be conditional cash handouts. But I think in classic Guyana style, we are already having an argument about how we're spending money that we don't yet have. And we haven't begun to decide how it is we are going to grow this money. Just imagine my great-great-grandmother, if she was Indian, who used to put money under the bed. She would never take that money and say, oh, I got to distribute it. It's how you grow it. And that's really where the political argument should be. How do we grow this pie that we have before we start distributing what we haven't yet created?
Another question or comment?
Good evening, Mr. Hughes.
Good evening, sir.
I wish to acknowledge a few ministers, given the fact that I am...
You just chased one.
Given the fact that I am a public servant. The advent of oil caught us unprepared. It's clear to all of us that this has happened, we're in it, we're trying to get out of it. the question will come at the end of the comment that I'm making. We in Guyana have to start from the top. Because we were caught by surprise with the advent of oil, which shows that we are totally unprepared. I have come across, as a public servant, situations whereby the public servant, the public service, the ministries, the structure, what we have, are 40 and 50 years old. And the question there is, how can you operate in 2019, 2020 with a structure that came from independence? We inherited this system and we haven't tweaked it enough to make it work for us. I don't believe that we should throw out the Constitution. I believe that the Constitution is a living document that needs to be tweaked as we go along. That it should be constantly being upgraded and changed so that you're not caught by surprise like we were with the advent of oil. As you mentioned, sir, 1 year was wasted and there's no legislation with regard to improving our stance with regard to the oil industry. So, my question to you is, one, how do we fix it? Does a completely new constitution fix the problem, fix and put Guyana on standing to be able to deal with all that's what's going to come? It's not only oil, it's not only expats, it's not only an influx of foreigners. You know, how do we go about, where do we start? Should we start, I made a comment the other day, we need to start from the top. We need to fix the Constitution. We need to get that right, whereby we don't have a situation where you have discretion of anybody, discretion of ministers with regard to anything. It should all be in the Constitution and in the laws. Transparent, so that no one could ever feel that something happened and I feel insecure or I feel left out. Where do we start, Mr. Hughes?
Thank you. I don't think we have a quarrel about the change to the Constitution. I propose a new one. It doesn't have to be a new one. But I agree with you. Once you effect the changes, and it's an evolving it's an evolving instrument, then we can get there. So we don't actually have a quarrel on that. The reason I was proposing a new Constitution is because historically we are at a juncture where our future calls for new aspirations, and we can capture that. But we can capture new aspirations in the existing Constitution, literally by changing Article 1 and saying, you know, now that we're going forward with a new ecological era with responsible governance, blah, 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 blah. And so we're really arguing mechanics here. So there's no magic in new versus amendments to what they have. You talk about the rules in the civil service being 40 to 50 years old. Imagine our petroleum, the structure. Our petroleum legislation is 1978. Just think about what happened in 1978. When Exxon found oil in Guyana in 2015, that was in deep sea. There were only 3 countries in the planet, 3 companies in the planet who could have drilled to that depth. That's 3,500 meters to the floor of the ocean, and then another 6,500 meters beneath the floor of the ocean. How can you possibly have legislation that didn't even remotely dream of deep sea exploration in 1978 that you want to bend the present realities of the oil industry into? So, civil service, oil and gas industry, several industries, we need.
Testing.
We need to be up to date, and we need to have the capacity to be able to change. Think about how long it takes to get any legislation changed in Guyana. It is forever. We have to get past that. We have to get to a stage where we can take a decision that is in our best national interest and change the legislation quickly. The civil service, without a doubt. You can't have an efficient, competitive country if your civil service is not up to date and being constantly trained. So I think, but you see, unfortunately, we get caught in dinosaur politics. You know, if you try to do that, you know, somebody's saying you're trying to take my political base, and we get into ridiculous arguments that are really not relevant to the development of the country. So we are not actually at variance. I think what you've articulated, I fully agree, and it's only a matter of mechanics whether you want to keep the existing constitution and change, for example, the aspirational and other elements, or whether you want a new document. My proposal for a new document was born out of the fact that historically we are at a particular stage which will allow everybody to be committed. You see, the problem with the existing constitution is once you start to talk about it, depending on which day of the week it is, it becomes a Burnham constitution or somebody else's constitution, which really irrelevant. And I think is amazing that Mr. Burnham died in 1985 and we're still arguing about it. It means that we're in the business of dealing with the dead. But anyway, I hope that addresses the question that you had.
So I think the last comment ties in very nicely with my question. In your presentation, you referred to aspects of the Constitution that we know definitely need to be looked at. And I think generally, especially what has transpired this year, we've seen even more of the deficiencies. And yet, to change the Constitution, there are many aspects of it where you need the 2/3 majority to do that. And we are very aware of the challenges we have. So the question is, with the current environment between political parties in Guyana, with the mistrust, what specific, what would you recommend that we could actually do in terms of something that would make it easier for us to be able to start dealing with the mistrust, to be able to come to a table and to be able to discuss meaningful change to some of the aspects of the Constitution? Because I think immediately we all go into our camps. And there are challenges that we saw the last time round when we were changing the Constitution. We did not get the support. We could not get the 2/3. So, you know, what is it you would recommend that will start to provide an environment that can bring the political parties to talk with a view to changing?
I'm happy that everybody else is here because clearly my wife doesn't listen to what I say. I started and I close with, it takes leadership. It comes down to leadership. Now, if I were a presidential leader, if I was a presidential advisor, I would say to the leader, do something bold, do something unimagined, and walk into your competitor's camp and say, we have a country to build, come join me, let's hold hands and build this country. Bold leadership. That's what you need. So, if I were advising a president, I would say, dear Mr. President, please, let us go to the other side. Forget what the leadership of the other side says at the political level. Join with them and go to meet his people, because at the end of the day, all our needs, our fears, and our aspirations are the same, irrespective of where we go. Irrespective. So, if we acknowledge that fact, then we have a basis upon which we can engage. We have a basis. Everybody wants their child to be better. Everybody wants a place in the sun. Everybody wants a secure tomorrow. Don't tell me that because you don't agree with my methodology that we can't find a common basis. So to answer the minister, I would say bold leadership is what you need.
Thank you. It's interesting you made that statement, because I was going to ask you a question on a more constitutional approach to governance in Guyana. And other than given the political dynamics of Guyana, how do you see it realistically? Not necessarily by literally just walking from office of the president to the
office of the opposition leader.
No, let me correct that. That's
I don't mean
definitely, no, but I really want to disabuse people. This is not about walking from the office of the president, or the president's home, to the opposition leaders. This is about going into communities that were traditionally hostile to you, living in those communities, and understanding what it is like. I just shared one small experience. I went to Black Bush Boulder with an AFC person when I was in active politics and spent the night there. I get exposed to a part of history and culture that I would not normally get exposed to. So when a rice farmer from Black Bush Boulder articulates a fear he has, I have a different perspective. Similarly with different communities. So I'm not talking about the president going to the lead of the opposition, because I don't believe that the political leadership of any side truly understands even their own supporters' fears and their own supporters' insecurities. Absolutely, you have to go into the community. So I just want to make sure that I wasn't talking about a long walk between Freedom House and
Oh, we recognize that. And we said, notwithstanding that, we recognize that Ghana really needs to embrace this more constitutional approach to democracy. And I was glad you made that statement first. Now, there's another question. Given the fact that you mentioned a whole series of discussions on the changes that are expected in Ghana, what strategies do you believe, whomever comes out, and because we have a winner-take-all system, whoever comes out on March 2nd, what strategies do you think can best secure Guyana in the short term? Because we recognize all the variances that Guyana has to address in its cultural dynamics and its management systems. What immediate strategies we can do to be, I don't want to use the word protectionist for our society, but along those lines, to protect our society from those variances that are going to positively or negatively, in fact, impact us as a society.
So I just want to make sure I got your question correct. I mean, what would you do politically come March 5th? Because you know we come to the votes before March 5th. Okay. I have to draw on what I said before. Whoever wins March 5th, assuming everybody accepts that the election was free and fair, which is a big challenge in Guyana, because it's a political strategy not to admit elections are free and fair. But let's assume that we have reached a level of maturity where we accept the results are free and fair. Whoever wins, a significant part of your population already feels that they are isolated and they are not part of the process. So their incentive is to be disrupted. That's the incentive. There's no incentive whatsoever to play by the rules. You know, the English have this concept of a loyal opposition. I can't be loyal if I shut out to the system. I have to break the system down because I am not rewarded, or the system does not protect or reward me for playing the game. So if you have a significant part of your population that is left out, you've got to do something bold. Go say to the leader of the opposition, come, become my prime minister, or we go do this, go do that, and let us together work this out. But you see, oil money is distractive. Just think about the effect of the current laws, and I will close with this. If you wanted to represent underprivileged people as a political leader that came from that underprivileged class, you would have to be a millionaire to be able to get enough candidates in each district to be able to compete in national elections. So we got to start to talk about changing the laws so that those people who don't have access to finance can actually be able to compete in their own specific area and get to parliament. They don't have to go join a big party. We already have laws that the way our system is structured. Unless you have real resources, you're not going to begin to get relevant. That's why all the new candidates you see who are forming political parties come from very comfortable classes. None of them come from what we would call traditional struggling working classes. And it's because the campaign in Guyana, you got to be rich. How you get into Region 9? It's $50,000 selected. And that's selected. and you have to compete in at least 6 of the 10 of the 10 regions. So there's many things that we need. I think the more the merrier, but the more have to have a realistic chance of being more. That's where we're going. So again, to answer your question, you require bold, very bold, innovative, revolutionary steps.
All right, so I'm going to ask you a final question.
Can you finish it?
The final question? Sure. Back to you.
Good evening, Mr. Hughes. And it's a pleasure to listen to you and getting more education. I'm going to ask, I think it's an appropriate question. We are going through, and it's mind-boggling for me, and the devil can work overtime too, to put things in your mind and then put things Facebook-wise, on different threads. We have a situation that all of us in the AFC are going through, and it's bothersome something to everyone. And my brothers and sisters in the AFC, I know they are bothered too. And it's coming to a stage where there is teeth and tongue and nitpicking and all kind of nonsense going on within us. We at an NEC, I don't know.
Basir, I think you know where you're going, and this is not the time for that. So I want to really ask you to not to put it here this evening, right? It's a different forum, and we're going to have a time where we can ventilate on that matter, but it's not for this evening.
All right, let me just, okay, I'll make a little switch. Coming down to like a refinery stage in Guyana, with our goal is being recycled, going overseas, recycle, come back. And we have to purchase at exorbitant prices. Timber, the same, going to India, Italy, refine, come back, deadheads, flow beds. Look at our oil and gas now. There's no refinery in place there. And I think that's a very important place. So we could cap out now and stop things going out of Guyana just like that free. Timber is going free, gold is going free, and oil and gas again. Exxon Mobil, it's taking everything out. There's supposed to be something in place as a refinery in Guyana. So I don't know if you want to.
I'll comment on that in this regard. Oil refineries, the market has to take place of that. That's not a government's responsibility. If you want to open an oil refinery and you think it's economically feasible, go open it like any other business. I agree with you on the second point. Our biggest challenge that we have always had prior to independence is cheap energy. Cheap energy is what transformed Trinidad, and we finally have an opportunity with the abundance of gas that if the feasibility study, and I emphasize feasibility study, says that it makes sense to pipe the gas 120 miles onshore to an LNG plant that will give us cheap electricity, then we are going to go forward in leaps and bounds. And once we have cheap electricity, it makes sense to manufacture and to value add every other product. That is exactly what Trinidad did. Trinidad, when they found gas, they set up the entire downstream industry for gas. They were making chemicals, everything, and they put up tariffs so that they could grow their breakfast food industry. If you go into the supermarket, other than North American breakfast foods, all of them come from Trinidad. And the reason for that is that when Eric Williams was Prime Minister, he put in place policies to allow local industry to grow on cheap energy and protected them so that when they became strong enough, they could compete globally. So if you look at the Chubby Bottle is Trinidad, SM Jamil. It is now a global product. And trust me, with the talent that I have seen in Guyana, I have no doubt the young people, once they're given half a chance, not a full chance, that we will become the most competitive once we have cheap energy. So once you get cheap energy, that's fine. The refinery, if you want to go invest your money, that's fine. I don't think there's a lot of refineries in the world, and to bring it, Guyana is not a military power. So refineries are normally tied to your national security interests. We can't beat any of our neighbors in a war, period. So don't let's go spend money on refinery, because our national security interest right now is the United States Army. Yeah, anywhere else.
All right, so the final question here. Mr. Hughes, fairly bright guy.
I beg to differ.
And you talked about a modern constitution, a modern vision. This question might give you a chance to sum up some of what you said. Less concentration and power in the hands of the executive. A bold question. If you were president, what things might you do differently? Law, politics, oil and gas?
That's why I went to psychotropic substances, because I would have to be in some mind-altering drug to constantly even consider being president. But if I were advising the president, like I said, you need bold steps. I mean, you mean me personally, or what I would do if I were advising? I would tell the president he's got to do something bold. He's got to trust. If I put you in the position, think about it. If President Granger went to Mr. Jack Neal and said, run the country for a month with this cabinet, bring in 2 people. When he gets over the shock, this is Mr. Jack Neal, what do you think he's going to be doing differently to what is actually going on today? Assuming you have strong, transparent systems. The battle between our political parties is not on ideology and it's not on methodology. It's about raw power. So call them out. Call them out. You want the power? Take the power. You want to live in my cabinet and you can bring in 3 others. Let's see what happens. And then when it can't work, you sit up and we can find a way together. Different thinking.
Let's put our hands together for our future speaker. It's Nigel Hughes, attorney at law. Thank you for a sterling presentation and taking the time to answer the many questions. I'm certain our thoughts are flowing, our minds have been expanded, and we will go forward, I think, a little better than we came this evening. Thank you very, very, very much, sir.
I just want to say, I want to commend Sharon and the AFC team to put this together, because I think this is a very positive step. If you continue to have forum like this, where people can come and talk about issues without getting trapped in the domestic political hostility that exists. So thank you and congratulations.
Let's put our hands together once more. I want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for taking the time to come out, to sit with us, and to listen, to ask the questions. You are very, very valuable to us. You are still valuable to us as we continue to celebrate our 14th anniversary. Again, thank you very, very, very much. I look forward to seeing more of you. Get home safely. God bless you, and God bless your families.